Story 1. The Way Station That Measures Souls. Douglas Ramirez had been hauling freight for Continental Express for 19 years, and in that time he'd passed through hundreds of way stations across 48 states. They were routine, sometimes annoying, but necessary checkpoints where authorities verified weight limits, inspected equipment, and ensured compliance with transportation regulations. On the night of October 31, 2018, Douglas encountered a way station that measured something far more disturbing than the weight of his cargo. He was driving south on Highway 99 through California's Central Valley, hauling a load of canned goods from Sacramento to Bakersfield. It was Halloween night, though Douglas barely registered the date. Holidays meant little when you lived on the road. The weather was mild, traffic was light, and he was making good time, expecting to arrive at his delivery point by 3 a.m. Around 11:45 p.m., just north of Fresno, he saw the familiar blue sign, Way Station 1 mile. All trucks must enter when open. The signal lights were green, indicating the station was operational, and mandatory entry was required. Douglas activated his turn signal and began merging into the deceleration lane, preparing for the routine inspection. As he approached, something felt wrong. The way station looked older than he remembered. The building was a dated concrete structure with small windows and weathered paint, not the modern prefabricated units common in California. The lighting was dim, yellow sodium vapor lamps instead of the bright white LEDs standard at contemporary facilities. Only one lane appeared to be open, marked by orange cones funneling trucks into a single inspection bay. Douglas rolled slowly onto the scale platform, his freight liner Cascadia settling with the familiar compression of air suspension. He waited for the signal light to indicate whether he should proceed or pull into the inspection area. Instead of the standard red or green light, a digital sign flickered to life with a message that made his blood run cold. Driver Douglas Ramirez, proceed to inspection building. Mandatory soul audit required. Soul audit? Douglas read the message 3 times, certain he was misunderstanding. His company name and truck number would be normal to display, but his personal name shouldn't be in their system before he'd even presented his documentation. And soul audit made no sense in any regulatory context he knew. The signal light turned red and a speaker crackled to life. Driver, exit your vehicle and report to the inspection office immediately. This is a mandatory checkpoint. Failure to comply will result in citation and impoundment. Douglas set his parking brake and climbed down from the cab, his unease growing with every step. The way station grounds were eerily quiet. No other trucks, no inspectors visible, no sounds of normal operations. Just his truck idling on the scale and the dim glow from the building's windows casting yellow rectangles across the cracked pavement. He walked to the building entrance, a heavy metal door with a small window of reinforced glass. Through the window he could see a counter and what appeared to be an office area beyond, but no people. Douglas pulled the door open. It was heavier than it should have been, the hinges groaning, and stepped inside. The interior was cold, at least 20 degrees colder than the exterior, and his breath immediately formed visible clouds. The space looked like a way station office from the 1970s, metal desks with manual typewriters, filing cabinets with handwritten labels, rotary phones, and paperwork stacked in wire baskets. Everything was covered with a thin layer of dust, as if the facility had been abandoned for years but somehow remained operational. "Hello?" Douglas called out, his voice echoing in the empty room. "I'm here for the mandatory inspection." A door at the back of the office opened, and a man emerged. He wore a uniform that resembled a highway patrol officer's outfit, but the design was archaic, the style and cut decades out of date. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were deeply sunken, giving him the appearance of severe illness or extreme exhaustion. "Douglas Ramirez," the man said, his voice flat and emotionless. He wasn't reading from any documentation, he simply knew the name. You're here for your soul audit. Please have a seat. He gestured to a metal chair positioned in front of the counter. I think there's been a mistake, Douglas said, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm just passing through. Standard weigh-in. I don't know what a soul audit is, but it's not part of normal inspection procedures. The man's expression didn't change. All drivers pass through here eventually. Some early in their careers, some late. You've been driving for 19 years, covering 2.3 million miles. Your appointment was scheduled for tonight. Please sit down so we can begin. Douglas felt rooted to the spot, his mind struggling to process the impossible situation. This man knew details about his career that weren't visible on his license or registration. I want to leave, Douglas said firmly. I'm refusing this inspection. I'll report to the next way station. You cannot leave until the audit is complete, the man said, still in that same emotionless monotone. The scale outside measures more than weight, Mr. Ramirez. It measures the burden you carry, the choices you've made, the lives you've affected during your time on the road. Every driver accumulates a record, moments of kindness, moments of cruelty, decisions that helped others, decisions that caused harm. The soul audit reviews this record and determines your balance. That's insane, Douglas said, backing toward the door. I'm leaving right now. He turned and grabbed the door handle, but it wouldn't move. The door was locked, though there was no visible locking mechanism, and he'd entered freely just minutes ago. Douglas pulled harder, then pounded on the metal. Let me out! This is illegal detention! Please sit down, the man repeated, unmoved by Douglas's panic. Fighting the audit only extends the process. Cooperation makes it faster and less painful. Douglas turned back to face the man, his heart hammering. What happens if I refuse? What happens if my balance is wrong? What are you going to do to me? For the first time, something like emotion crossed the man's gray face. Not quite a smile, but a subtle shift that might have been satisfaction. The scale has already measured you, Mr. Ramirez. The weight of your choices, the burden of your conscience. You passed through the checkpoint the moment you drove onto the platform. Now we simply review the findings and deliver the judgment. Against every instinct screaming at him to fight or flee, Douglas walked to the metal chair and sat down. The chair was ice cold through his jeans, and he could feel the chill seeping into his bones. The man opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder. A physical manila folder, worn and thick with papers. He placed it on the counter and opened it, revealing page after page of handwritten entries. Let us begin, the man said, running a gray finger down the first page. March 14, 2003, Highway 80, Nevada. You encountered a stranded motorist, a woman with 2 children whose car had overheated. You stopped, provided water, used your CB to call for assistance, and waited with them until help arrived. Duration, 47 minutes. You were late for your delivery and received a reprimand from your dispatcher. The woman and her children made it home safely that night because of your choice. Douglas remembered that incident. He'd almost not stopped because he was already running late. But seeing the children in the back seat had made the decision for him. Okay, he said cautiously. So you're recording good deeds. We record everything, the man corrected. August 22, 2007, Interstate 40, Tennessee. You were driving impaired, not drugs or alcohol, but severe exhaustion, having been awake for 19 consecutive hours. You fell asleep at the wheel for approximately 4 seconds. When you woke, you had drifted into the shoulder, missing a disabled vehicle by less than 3 feet. The driver of that vehicle, changing a tire, would have been killed if you had not woken when you did. You chose to continue driving instead of stopping to rest, prioritizing your delivery schedule over safety. The near miss was luck, not judgment. Douglas felt shame wash over him. He'd never told anyone about that moment, had barely admitted it to himself. He justified continuing to drive by, promising himself he'd rest at the next stop. But deep down, he'd known he was dangerously impaired. The man continued reading, entry after entry, a complete accounting of Douglas's 19 years on the road. Acts of kindness, helping stranded motorists, reporting hazards on his CB, mentoring new drivers, donating to trucker assistance funds. Acts of selfishness or recklessness, driving too fast in school zones to make up time, cutting off other vehicles in traffic, lying on his logbooks about hours of service, ignoring obvious equipment problems because inspections would cause delays. Some entries were more significant. November 2011. Douglas had witnessed an accident but hadn't stopped because he was hauling time-sensitive freight. His testimony might have helped determine fault, but he'd prioritized his delivery over civic responsibility. June 2015. He'd been kind to a waitress at a truck stop who'd been having a terrible day, and his encouragement had helped her through a moment when she'd been contemplating self-harm. Douglas had never known his casual kindness had such impact. The audit went on for what felt like hours. The man read every entry in a monotone voice, neither praising the good nor condemning the bad, simply recording the facts of Douglas's choices and their consequences. The cold in the room intensified, and Douglas found himself shivering violently, his teeth chattering. Finally, the man reached the last page. He was silent for a long moment, his finger resting on the final entry. Then he looked up at Douglas with those sunken, hollow eyes. "The audit is complete. Your balance has been calculated." "And?" Douglas asked, his voice barely a whisper. "You are weighted with 63% positive actions and 37% negative actions, accounting for severity and consequence of each choice. This represents a passing balance. You have caused more good than harm during your time on the highways. You will be permitted to continue." Relief flooded through Douglas so intensely that tears sprang to his eyes. "Thank you," he gasped. "Thank you, I'll do better, I'll make better choices." The man held up one gray hand. "You do not understand the full meaning of permitted to continue. Drivers who fail the audit, those whose balance falls below 50% positive, are not permitted to continue. Not their careers, not their journeys, not their lives. The highways claim them. They leave this building, return to their trucks, and within 24 hours, they experience fatal accidents. Single vehicle incidents, mechanical failures, medical emergencies. The method varies, but the result is constant. The highways take what is owed." Douglas felt the relief drain away, replaced by horror. "You're saying you kill drivers who fail your audit? That's murder." "We do not kill," the man said, his voice still emotionless. "The highways themselves maintain the balance. Too many reckless, cruel, selfish drivers create danger for everyone. The sole audit identifies those whose presence on the road causes more harm than good, and the highways correct the imbalance. We are simply the measuring point, the checkpoint where the accounting occurs." "How many drivers fail?" Douglas asked, almost afraid of the answer. "Approximately 1 in 7, the man replied. "Most drivers believe they are better than they are, more careful, more considerate. But the scale does not lie. It measures truth. Every close call caused by impatience, every courteous act avoided out of selfishness, every moment when a choice was made that prioritized personal convenience over collective safety." The man closed the folder and returned it to the filing cabinet. "Your audit is complete, Mr. Ramirez. You may return to your vehicle and continue your journey. You will not remember the specific details of this audit within 24 hours. The memory will fade like a dream, leaving only a vague unease. But the impact will remain. You will find yourself making more careful choices, being more considerate, prioritizing safety over schedule. The audit changes drivers, even those who pass. It serves as a recalibration of conscience. Douglas stood on shaking legs. Will I have to come back here? Will I be audited again? Every driver is audited once, the man said. Only once. Your balance was measured tonight. What you do with the rest of your career is your choice, but you will never return to this checkpoint. Others will in their time, but not you. Douglas walked to the door, and this time the handle turned easily. He stepped out into the night, which now felt warm compared to the Arctic interior of the building. He walked to his truck, climbed into the cab, and looked back at the way station building. It looked different now, more modern with contemporary lighting and a newer structure. The windows showed a normal way station interior with computer equipment and updated furnishings. Douglas blinked, wondering if he'd somehow entered a different building than the one he'd just left. A voice came over his CB radio. Northbound truck on the scale, you're clear to proceed. Have a safe night. It was a normal voice, professional and courteous, nothing like the flat monotone of the gray man. Douglas released his parking brake and drove away from the way station, merging back onto Highway 99. He checked his clock. Only 7 minutes had passed since he'd exited the highway, though the audit had felt like hours. His logbook, his GPS, his truck's systems all showed just a brief pause, a normal way station stop. Over the following weeks, Douglas found the memory fading exactly as the man had predicted. The specific details became hazy, dreamlike, hard to distinguish from imagination. But the impact remained. He found himself making different choices, stopping to rest when tired even if it meant being late, helping stranded motorists even when inconvenient, being more patient in traffic, maintaining his equipment more carefully. He tried to find that way station again on subsequent trips through the Central Valley. He drove the same route, exited at every way station between Sacramento and Bakersfield, but none of them felt right. None had that dated architecture, that crushing cold, that sense of standing at a threshold between the mundane and the metaphysical. Douglas spoke carefully to other veteran drivers, asking in vague terms if they'd ever experienced anything unusual at way stations. Most looked at him like he was crazy, but a few, just a few, got a distant look in their eyes and changed the subject quickly, as if remembering something they'd been made to forget. One driver, an elderly man named Walter, who'd been on the road for 40 years, pulled Douglas aside after one such conversation. "You went through the audit," Walter said quietly. "It wasn't a question. I can see it in your eyes, that look drivers get when they've been measured and came out the other side." "You too?" Douglas asked. Walter nodded slowly. 30 years ago on I-35 in Kansas. I barely remember it now, but I know it happened. I know I was weighed and found adequate. Some of my friends weren't so lucky. Good drivers, or so I thought, but they all died within a year of their audits. Accidents, everyone. I always wondered if they'd been measured and found wanting. "Do you know who runs it?" Douglas asked. "Who they are? What gives them the right to judge us?" "I don't know if they're human," Walter said. "I don't know if they're ghosts or angels or something else entirely. But I know the highways are living things in their own way. Millions of people drive them every day, making choices, causing consequences. Maybe the universe needs a system to maintain balance, to ensure that the people spending the most time on the roads, us professional drivers, are net positives instead of net negatives. Maybe the soul audit is that system." Douglas continued driving for Continental Express, but he was different, more careful, more considerate, more aware of the weight of his choices. He knew he'd been given a gift, not just passing the audit, but receiving the knowledge that his actions mattered, that they were being measured against a cosmic scale that cared about more than profit and efficiency. He never saw the gray man again. never returned to that cold office with its archaic equipment and impossible record-keeping. But sometimes, late at night on empty highways, Douglas would pass a way station and feel a chill run down his spine, a momentary certainty that somewhere in that building was a filing cabinet containing folders on every driver who'd ever rolled across the scale, and that the balance was being maintained, one audit at a time. And on those nights, Douglas would check his speed, his following, distance, his alertness. He'd think about the choices ahead of him, to rest or push through, to help or ignore, to prioritize safety or schedule. And he'd make the better choice, knowing that somewhere, somehow, those choices were being recorded, and that the highways themselves were watching, waiting, weighing every driver who traveled their infinite miles, measuring not just the weight of cargo but the weight of souls. Story 2. The Phantom Toll Booth. Marcus Webb had been driving for Nationwide Transport for 15 years, specializing in overnight routes that paid premium rates for drivers willing to work through the night. On April 3, 2019, he was hauling industrial equipment from Detroit, Michigan to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, following the Interstate 80 corridor eastward through Ohio. The route included several toll roads, and Marcus kept a dedicated envelope of cash specifically for toll payments, having learned that some booths had equipment failures that prevented credit card processing. Around 2:30 a.m., somewhere in rural Ohio between Youngstown and the Pennsylvania border, Marcus approached a toll plaza he didn't remember from previous trips. The green overhead sign read, "Toll Plaza, exact change required, $3.50. The configuration was unusual. Instead of the modern multi-lane plazas with electronic toll collection and dedicated easy pass lanes, this was an old-style single-lane booth, the kind that had been mostly phased out in favor of automated systems. Marcus slowed his Kenworth T880 and rolled down his window, pulling 3 $1 bills and 2 quarters from his toll envelope. The night was cold and moonless, and the toll plaza was illuminated by vintage yellow lights that cast everything in sickly amber tones. The booth itself was a small concrete structure with a single window, and through that window Marcus could see a figure in a toll collector's uniform. He pulled up to the window and extended his hand with the money. The toll collector, a middle-aged man with hollow cheeks and dark circles under his eyes, took the bills and coins without a word. His fingers were ice-cold when they brushed against Marcus's hand, and his touch sent an unpleasant shock up Marcus's arm, like static electricity but more intense. The toll collector counted the money slowly, methodically, his movements stiff and mechanical. Then he looked up at Marcus with eyes that reflected the yellow light in an unsettling way, almost like an animal's eyes caught in headlights. "Insufficient payment," the man said, his voice raspy and dry. Marcus frowned. "It's $3.50, exactly what the sign said. $3.50. The toll collector shook his head slowly. "The sign displays the monetary toll. You have paid the monetary toll. But every passage requires 2 payments, the currency toll and the memory toll. You have not paid the memory toll." "Memory toll?" Marcus said, confusion mixing with growing unease. "I don't understand. That's not how toll roads work." "This is not an ordinary toll road," the collector replied. "This is a passage between territories, between states of being. The memory toll is payment for safe passage. You must surrender a memory, something significant, something that has weight and meaning. The more valuable the memory, the safer your passage." Marcus stared at the man, trying to determine if this was some kind of prank or if the toll collector was mentally disturbed. "I'm not giving you any memories. Just raise the gate and let me through." The toll collector's expression didn't change. "The gate cannot rise until the toll is paid. These are the rules of passage. You may select the memory yourself, or we will select one for you. The choice is yours, but the toll will be collected." Marcus looked past the booth at the gate, a standard striped barrier arm blocking the lane. He could probably drive through it, break the flimsy arm and continue. He'd done it once before at an unmanned toll booth during an emergency. But something about this situation made him hesitate. The toll plaza felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate, and the collector's certainty was unsettling. "What happens if you select the memory?" Marcus asked, still trying to understand what was happening. "We take what is available," the collector said. "We reach into your mind and extract something valuable. It might be a cherished moment with a loved one, a formative experience from your childhood, a triumph you're proud of, or a lesson you learned through hardship. Whatever we take, it will be gone completely. Not forgotten, but erased as if it never existed in your consciousness. You will have a gap, a void where that memory once was, but you will not remember what was lost." Marcus felt his skin crawl. "That's impossible. You can't take someone's memories. This is insane." "And yet here we are," the collector said, extending his cold hand through the window. "Make your choice, driver. Select a memory to surrender, or we select for you. But the toll will be paid before you pass." Marcus considered his options. He could try to drive through the gate, but something told him that would be a mistake, that breaking the rules of this place would have consequences worse than losing a memory. He could back up and try to find another route, but his GPS showed this as the only road in the area, and turning around on a highway in a fully loaded semi would be dangerous and possibly illegal. "If I choose the memory myself," Marcus said slowly, "can I pick something insignificant? Something I don't care about?" The toll collector's lips curved into something that might have been a smile but looked more like a grimace. "The toll must have weight. A meaningless memory has no value and will not open the gate. You must surrender something that matters, something that carries emotional significance. The greater the significance, the safer your passage. A minor memory will open the gate, but your journey beyond this point may be difficult." Marcus thought frantically through his memories, trying to identify something significant enough to satisfy the toll, but not so precious that losing it would devastate him. Memories of his childhood, of his late father, of his wedding day, all too valuable to surrender. Memories of mistakes and failures, possibly significant but painful enough that losing them might actually be relief rather than loss. Then he thought of a specific memory. His high school graduation night, June 1998. He'd celebrated with friends, driven around town, felt young and invincible and full of possibilities. It was a good memory, a happy one, but not essential to his identity. It had weight. It was the threshold between childhood and adulthood, but losing it wouldn't fundamentally change who he was. "My high school graduation night," Marcus said aloud. "June 14th, 1998. The whole evening from ceremony through the night. That's what I'm offering." The toll collector's hand remained extended. "Place your palm against mine. The memory will be transferred." Marcus hesitated, then pressed his palm against the toll collector's hand. The cold was immediate and intense, spreading from the point of contact up his arm toward his shoulder, his chest, his head. He felt something pulling at his mind, a strange sensation like fishing line being drawn out through his skull. Images flashed before his eyes, his younger self in a graduation gown, his mother crying with pride, friends whose names he suddenly couldn't recall. A party at someone's house, driving with the windows down, music playing, the feeling of freedom and infinite possibility. And then the images vanished. The cold receded. The toll collector withdrew his hand. "The memory toll has been paid. Your passage is granted. Drive safely, Mr. Webb." The barrier arm rose smoothly. Marcus sat stunned for a moment, trying to remember his high school graduation night. But there was nothing there. Just a gap, A void from approximately 4:00 p.m. on June 14, 1998, until dawn on June 15th. He knew factually that he had graduated. He had the diploma, the photos, but the experience itself was gone. Not forgotten, but erased, as if he'd been unconscious or in a coma during those hours. Marcus drove forward through the toll plaza in a daze. As he passed beneath the overhead structure and the gate arm lowered behind him, he glanced in his side mirror. The toll plaza was gone. Just empty highway stretching behind him. No structure, no lights, no booth. The road was continuous and unbroken, as if the toll plaza had never existed. He checked his GPS. It showed no toll plaza at his current location. He checked his receipt envelope. No new receipt, and his $3.50 were still there, uncounted. According to every objective measure, he hadn't stopped, hadn't paid any toll, hadn't interacted with anyone. But the memory was gone, and the void in his mind was undeniable proof that something had happened. Marcus continued driving but couldn't focus on the road. He kept probing at the gap in his memory, trying to reconstruct the missing hours through logic and context. He knew his graduation had been in the afternoon. He knew he'd woken up the next morning at home, but the hours between were simply absent, and trying to remember them produced only a blank space that made his head ache. Over the following days, Marcus tried to fill in the missing memory through external sources. He called his mother and asked about his graduation night. She described the ceremony, mentioned a party he'd attended at a classmate's house, said he'd come home around 2 a.m. happy and excited about his future. Marcus listened to her descriptions, but they produced no corresponding memories. The events she described might as well have happened to someone else. He looked through old photos. There were several from his graduation night, pictures of him in his gown with friends at the party. He recognized his younger self, recognized some of the people, but the images triggered no memories, no sense of, I remember this moment. They were just photos of a stranger who happened to look like him. The loss was more disturbing than Marcus had anticipated. It wasn't like normal forgetting, where you might not remember details but retain a general sense of the event. This was complete erasure. The experience had been excised from his consciousness, and he was left with a void that could never be filled, because you cannot re-experience a moment that has already passed. Marcus became obsessed with understanding what had happened. He drove the same route multiple times, looking for the toll plaza, but never found it. He researched toll roads in Ohio and found no record of any plaza matching the description at that location. He asked other drivers if they'd ever encountered similar experiences, and most looked at him like he was crazy. But a few drivers, when pressed, admitted to strange toll plaza encounters. A woman named Cheryl described stopping at a toll booth where the collector had demanded a different kind of payment. Not memory, but luck. She'd felt compelled to agree, and ever since she'd experienced an unusual string of minor misfortunes. Missed deliveries, equipment failures, health issues. Nothing catastrophic, but a steady drumbeat of bad luck that had altered the trajectory of her career. Another driver, Stephen, described a toll plaza that demanded time. He'd paid with his watch, which the collector had accepted literally, but discovered after passing through that he'd lost 3 years. Not 3 years of his life, but 3 years of his age. Medical records showed he'd been born in 1974, but his memory insisted he was born in 1971. Somehow, 3 years had been removed from his timeline, and no one except him seemed aware of the discrepancy. Marcus realized the toll plazas were collecting more than money. They were harvesting aspects of human experience, memories, luck, time, possibly other things he couldn't even name. They appeared randomly, unpredictably on ordinary highways, and they demanded payment from drivers who had the misfortune to encounter them. The question that haunted Marcus was, why? What purpose did these collections serve? Were the toll collectors human or something else wearing human form? What happened to the memories, luck, and time they collected? Were these resources consumed, stored, traded, used for some incomprehensible purpose? Marcus never found answers to those questions. But approximately 8 months after his encounter with the phantom toll booth, he received a letter in the mail. No return address, no postmark, just his name and address handwritten on the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper with a brief message. Mr. Webb, your memory toll has been processed and archived. Thank you for your payment. Should you wish to reclaim the memory you surrendered, it is available for repurchase at the following rate: 20 years of life expectancy to be collected upon your natural death. If you accept this exchange, the memory will be restored, but your life will end 20 years earlier than it otherwise would have. To accept, return to the plaza at the coordinates below at midnight on the next full moon. To decline, destroy this letter. Below the message were GPS coordinates, a location in rural Ohio not far from where Marcus believed the toll plaza had appeared. Marcus sat at his kitchen table staring at the letter for hours. The offer was clear. He could reclaim his stolen memory, but the price would be 20 years of his life. He was 41 years old. If he lived to a typical age, he might have 30 or 40 years remaining. Giving up 20 years to recover a single night from his youth seemed like a terrible bargain. But the void gnawed at him. Not knowing, not remembering, having a hole in his personal history. It was a constant irritation, a missing piece that prevented him from feeling complete. Was one perfect memory of youthful joy and possibility worth 20 years of elderly life? He honestly didn't know. Marcus kept the letter for 3 weeks, through a full moon cycle and past the offered deadline. He never returned to the coordinates. He chose to live with the void, accepting the loss rather than compounding it. Eventually, he destroyed the letter as instructed, burning it in his fireplace and watching the paper curl and blacken and disappear into ash. But sometimes, late at night, when driving through dark stretches of highway, Marcus watches for toll plazas. He reads every overhead sign, checks every collection booth, examines every barrier gate. Part of him dreads seeing that single-lane booth with its yellow lights and hollow-eyed collector. But another part of him hopes to find it again, to demand answers, to understand what was taken and why and where it went. The highways have their rules, Marcus has learned. They demand payment in forms beyond currency. Some tolls are measured in dollars and cents, but others are measured in memory and luck and time and aspects of human experience that shouldn't be tradable but somehow are. And drivers who travel those highways never know when they'll encounter a plaza that demands more than spare change, a collector who measures wealth in currencies that cannot be deposited in banks or recorded in ledgers. Marcus Webb still drives, still hauls freight through the night on routes that cross multiple states. But he carries more than his usual toll envelope now. He carries the awareness that every passage has a price, that some costs are visible and some are hidden, and that the highways themselves are living ledgers maintaining balances in accounts that drivers never agreed to open but somehow hold nonetheless. And in a filing cabinet somewhere in some impossible archive that exists beyond ordinary geography, there is a record labeled Marcus Webb, graduation night, June 14, 1998. It contains every detail of that lost evening. The sights, sounds, emotions, sensations, preserved perfectly and completely, held against the possibility that Marcus might one day return and pay the price to reclaim what was taken. But until that day, if it ever comes, the memory remains in storage, and Marcus remains incomplete, driving through the darkness with a void in his past and a lingering awareness that he surrendered something precious at a toll booth that doesn't exist on any map. Story 3. The Convoy of the Dead. Elizabeth Park had been driving for Pacific Rim Logistics for 12 years, and she prided herself on her professionalism and her ability to handle long solo routes that intimidated less experienced drivers. On February 9, 2021, she was hauling consumer electronics from Seattle, Washington to Boise, Idaho, following Interstate 90 eastward through Washington state before turning south toward her destination. The weather forecast predicted snow in the mountain passes, but Elizabeth had chains and experience driving in winter conditions. She departed Seattle at 7:00 p.m., planning to drive through the night and arrive in Boise by midday the following day. The first several hours were uneventful. Light traffic, dry roads, clear visibility. But as she climbed into the Cascade Mountains, passing Snoqualmie Pass around 10:30 p.m., the predicted snow began to fall heavily, reducing visibility and forcing her to slow to 40 miles per hour. Around midnight, as Elizabeth navigated a particularly treacherous stretch of mountain highway, she noticed lights behind her. Multiple sets of headlights, at least 6 or 7 vehicles traveling in close formation. She moved to the right lane to allow them to pass, but instead of overtaking her, the convoy matched her reduced speed and maintained position behind her truck. Elizabeth watched her mirrors, trying to identify the vehicles. They appeared to be a mix of commercial trucks and passenger vehicles, all traveling together with unnaturally precise spacing. None of them varied their speed, none attempted to pass, none fell behind. They moved as a single unit, like cars on a train, maintaining perfect formation through the snowstorm. Her CB radio crackled to life with a voice she didn't recognize. "Lead vehicle, this is the convoy behind you. We're going to follow you through the pass. You have the best visibility. We'll match your pace. Don't stop." Elizabeth keyed her microphone. "Copy that, but I'm planning to stop at the next chain-up area to check my load. You're welcome to pass." "Negative," the voice responded. "You will not stop. We cannot stop. The convoy must keep moving. If you stop, we stop, and if we stop, we die. Keep driving." The strange phrasing sent a chill down Elizabeth's spine. "Say again, if you stop, you die? What does that mean?" No response, just static. Elizabeth tried again on different channels, but the voice didn't return. She looked in her mirrors at the convoy behind her, counting the lights. 8 vehicles total, following her at a distance of approximately 50 feet between each vehicle, maintaining perfect alignment despite the treacherous road conditions. Elizabeth's unease grew as she drove. The snow was falling heavily now, accumulation building on the shoulders and median, making the highway feel increasingly isolated and dangerous. She reduced her speed to 35 miles per hour, carefully navigating curves and managing her truck's weight on the icy pavement. The convoy behind her adjusted instantly, maintaining the same spacing and formation. Around 1:15 a.m., Elizabeth reached a rest area that was typically busy during daylight hours but appeared abandoned now. She needed to check her tire chains and use the restroom. Against the convoy's strange warning, she activated her turn signal and began to pull into the rest area exit lane. The CB radio exploded with sound, multiple voices shouting simultaneously, "Don't stop! Don't exit! Keep driving!" The urgency in their voices was desperate, terrified. Elizabeth hesitated, her truck halfway into the exit lane, torn between her own needs and the inexplicable panic from the convoy. In her mirror, she saw something that made her blood freeze. As she'd begun to exit, the convoy behind her had started to fade. The lights were growing dimmer, the vehicles becoming translucent as if they were dissolving or becoming ghost images. And through the fading forms, she could see what they actually were. Wrecks. Twisted metal, shattered glass, vehicles that had been destroyed in crashes but were somehow still moving, propelled by something other than engines. Elizabeth jerked her steering wheel, swerving back onto the main highway, abandoning the rest area. The moment her truck fully returned to the travel lane, the convoy behind her solidified again. becoming apparently normal vehicles with bright headlights and solid forms. Her hands were shaking on the steering wheel. She keyed the CB microphone. "What are you? What is this convoy?" The same voice from before responded, calmer now. "We're the February convoy. We travel this pass every year on this date. We died here, all of us, in a storm like this one in 1987. Multiple vehicle accident, 8 vehicles, 23 people dead. We're trapped in a loop, driving this pass over and over, trying to make it through without stopping, without crashing, trying to reach the end and finally escape. But we can't do it alone. We need a lead vehicle, someone alive who can see the road clearly, who can guide us through. You're our lead vehicle tonight." Elizabeth felt tears on her face, though she couldn't say if they were from fear or sympathy. "I can't guide you. I'm barely managing myself in this storm." "You're doing fine," the voice assured her. "Just keep driving. Don't stop. If you stop, we'll start to fade, and if we fade completely, we'll relive the crash. We'll experience our deaths again, just like we do every time we fail to complete the pass. Please, just keep us moving until we reach the east side. That's all we need." Elizabeth wanted to refuse, wanted to pull over and wait out the storm, wanted to escape this nightmare. But something in the voice, the exhaustion, the desperation, the endless repetition of trauma, moved her. These were people who died badly and were trapped in their final moments, condemned to repeat them annually unless they could find a way through. "How many times have you tried?" Elizabeth asked, her voice barely steady. "I don't know anymore," the voice replied. 30 times? 40? We started counting but lost track. Every February 9th, we appear on this highway at midnight and we drive until we crash. Or until we make it through. Most years we crash. The storm gets too bad, we lose visibility, something goes wrong, and we pile up just like we did originally. Then we wake up and it's February 9th again, midnight, and we start over, but every few years there's a lead vehicle. Someone like you driving this pass at the right time. And if they guide us through, if they get us to the east side before dawn, we might finally escape. "Has anyone ever succeeded?" Elizabeth asked. A pause. "We don't know. We don't remember previous years clearly. Everything blurs together, but we keep trying. We have to try." Elizabeth made a decision. She wasn't religious, wasn't particularly spiritual, but she believed in helping people when possible. If these trapped souls needed her to lead them through the pass, she would do it. "Okay," she said into the CB. "I'll guide you through. Stay close. Match my speed. I'll get us through this." The voice responded with what sounded like multiple people saying thank you at once, a chorus of gratitude from the convoy. Elizabeth drove with intense concentration for the next 2 hours, navigating the treacherous mountain pass in blizzard conditions. She fought exhaustion, fought the hypnotic effect of falling snow, fought the temptation to stop and rest. Behind her, the convoy maintained perfect formation, 8 ghost vehicles following her taillights through the storm. Several times Elizabeth encountered hazards, downed branches, sudden ice patches, sharp curves that appeared with little warning. Each time she managed to navigate safely, and the convoy followed precisely in her tracks. She called out warnings on the CB. "Sharp left curve ahead, ice on the right shoulder, reduce speed to 25, and the convoy adjusted immediately. Around 3:30 a.m., the snow began to lighten. Elizabeth descended the east side of the pass, leaving the worst of the storm behind. The highway ahead cleared, visibility improved, and she could see the lights of towns in the distance. She glanced at her mirrors. The convoy was still there, but the vehicles looked more solid now, more real, as if proximity to the finish line was strengthening them. At 4:47 a.m., Elizabeth reached the official end of the mountain pass, a sign that read, "Snoqualmie Pass elevation, 3,022 ft, eastern descent complete." She'd made it through. She'd guided herself and the convoy to the other side without stopping, without crashing, without anyone reliving their deaths. She looked in her mirrors, expecting to see the convoy still following. But the road behind her was empty. The 8 vehicles had vanished, leaving no trace. No tire tracks in the snow, no lights, nothing. They were simply gone. Elizabeth pulled into the next truck stop and parked, her body shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. She sat in her cab for 30 minutes, trying to process what had happened. Had it been real? Had she actually guided the ghosts of accident victims through the mountain pass? Or had she been hallucinating, experiencing some kind of altitude-induced or exhaustion-induced delusion? She tried to research the accident the convoy voice had mentioned, a multiple vehicle crash in 1987 on Snoqualmie Pass on February 9th. She found a news article from February 10, 1987 in a digital archive of a Seattle newspaper. The headline read, 23 dead in Snoqualmie Pass tragedy, multiple vehicle pileup in blizzard conditions. The article described a devastating accident that occurred around 1:30 a.m. on February 9, 1987, when a snowstorm caused visibility to drop to near zero. A convoy of 8 vehicles, 5 trucks and 3 cars, traveling together had failed to navigate a curve, resulting in a chain reaction crash that killed everyone involved. The article listed the victims' names and ages, describing it as one of the deadliest single accidents in Washington state highway history. Elizabeth cross-referenced the article with her own timeline. The convoy had started following her around midnight, just as the voice had said. They'd been trying to complete the pass before the 1:30 a.m. time when they'd originally crashed. By guiding them through successfully by 4:47 a.m., Elizabeth had helped them avoid the moment of their deaths. But had she freed them? Had successfully completing the pass finally released them from their loop? Elizabeth had no way to know. She'd never see them again, never know if her help had been enough to break the cycle, or if they'd appear again next February 9th, looking for another lead vehicle to guide them through. Elizabeth completed her delivery to Boise and returned home to Seattle, but she couldn't forget the convoy. The following year, on February 9, 2022, she deliberately positioned herself on Interstate 90 near Snoqualmie Pass around midnight, driving eastward in light snow conditions, hoping to see if the convoy would appear. She drove the entire pass, watching her mirrors constantly, but saw nothing unusual. No convoy, no ghost vehicles, no desperate voices on the CB. Just normal traffic and a quiet mountain crossing. Elizabeth chose to believe that meant she'd succeeded, that the convoy had finally escaped their loop and moved on to whatever comes after trapped souls find release. But she could never be certain. Some questions don't have answers, some endings are ambiguous. Some nights on dark highways involve experiences that can't be verified or explained. Elizabeth knows she encountered something that night in February 2021. Knows she led something through the pass. Knows that 23 people who died in 1987 needed help from someone in 2021. She continues to drive, continues to haul freight through mountain passes in winter storms, continues to watch her mirrors for convoys that follow too precisely and maintain impossible formations. And every February 9th, she thinks about the voices on her CB, thanking her for guiding them through, hoping against hope that she gave them what they'd been seeking for 34 years. A successful journey through the past that killed them, and a final escape from the loop of their own deaths. The highways remember their tragedies, Elizabeth has learned. The dead don't always rest peacefully, especially those who died suddenly and violently on roads they traveled every day. Some remain trapped, reliving their final moments, searching for resolution or escape. And occasionally the living can help them, not by prayer or ritual, but by simply driving carefully, completing a journey, guiding lost souls through dangerous passages and delivering them safely to the other side. Story 4. The mile marker that counts backwards. James Thornton had been driving for 17 years, working as an independent contractor who took jobs from various freight brokers rather than committing to a single company. On July 18, 2016, he was hauling construction materials from Denver, Colorado to Salt Lake City, Utah, following Interstate 70 westward through the Rocky Mountains. The route took him through some of the most spectacular and challenging terrain in America, including mountain passes, tunnels, and steep grades that tested both trucks and drivers. James departed Denver at 2:00 p.m., planning to reach Salt Lake City by 10:00 p.m. despite the difficult terrain. His Peterbilt 389 was well maintained and powerful enough to handle the mountains without significant delays. The afternoon was clear and warm, perfect weather for summer mountain driving. Traffic was moderate, mostly tourists and recreational vehicles enjoying the scenic route. Around 5:30 p.m., somewhere west of Glenwood Canyon, James noticed something odd about the mile markers. Interstate 70 uses sequential numbering with markers counting up as you travel west. But the marker he just passed read 189, and the next marker showed 190, backward from what should have been the sequence. James assumed he'd misread them, his eyes tired from hours of focusing on the winding mountain roads. But the next marker confirmed the discrepancy. 191. He was definitely seeing the numbers correctly, but they were counting backward, increasing in the direction he was traveling when they should have been decreasing. James checked his GPS to confirm his direction. The unit clearly showed him traveling westbound on I-70, exactly as intended. He grabbed his CB radio. Anyone else on I-70 westbound seeing weird mile marker numbers? This is eastbound construction hauler near Glenwood Canyon. A voice responded. Westbound near Eagle, no issues with mile markers here. You sure you're reading them right? Positive, James replied. They're counting up when they should be counting down, or I'm losing my mind. Another voice chimed in. Could be maintenance crew installed them backward. Report it to Highway Department when you get a chance. James accepted that explanation, though it didn't sit quite right. Would highway maintenance really install multiple mile markers in reverse sequence without anyone noticing? But he had no better theory, so he continued driving, watching the markers count upward. 192, 193, 194. Around 6:15 p.m., James realized the bigger problem. The mile markers weren't just counting backward, they were accelerating. Between the 200 and 201 markers, he traveled only half a mile according to his odometer. Between 201 and 202, only a quarter mile. The markers were appearing faster and faster, compressing space in ways that violated basic physics. James's heart rate increased. This wasn't a maintenance error. This was something impossible. He checked his GPS again, but the unit was malfunctioning now, the map flickering between different versions of the highway, the position marker jumping erratically. The next mile marker read 210, then 220, then 235, appearing at intervals of just a few hundred feet. James was traveling through space that shouldn't exist, covering mile marker distances without traveling the corresponding actual miles. His fuel gauge wasn't dropping appropriately, his odometer wasn't accumulating miles normally, and the sun's position in the sky seemed frozen at late afternoon. Despite more than an hour having passed since he'd entered this strange stretch of highway. At marker 250, the landscape around James began to change. The mountains looked wrong. The peaks were too sharp, the valleys too deep, the colors too saturated. Trees were subtly misshapen, rock formations had impossible geometries, and the sky was taking on a purplish tinge that didn't match any sunset James had ever seen. Mile marker 300 appeared. James had supposedly traveled over 100 markers in less than 15 minutes, an impossibility even at highway speeds. He tried his CB radio again, but every channel produced only static. His phone showed no signal. His GPS had given up entirely, displaying only position unknown and a blank map. James considered stopping, pulling over to wait out whatever was happening. But the shoulder of the road looked somehow insubstantial, as if pulling over would mean driving off into a void. The only solid real thing seemed to be the highway itself, the two westbound lanes stretching ahead of him, marked by increasingly frequent mile markers. Marker 400. The landscape was completely alien now. The mountains had been replaced by formations that looked more like coral reefs or frozen waves, vertical structures in colors that didn't exist in normal geology. The sky was deep purple with green clouds, and there were lights moving in the distance that might have been stars but moved too deliberately, too purposefully. James's breathing was rapid and shallow. He was no longer in Colorado, possibly no longer on Earth. The highway had taken him somewhere else, and the mile markers were counting up towards some destination he couldn't imagine and didn't want to reach. Marker 500. The road began to curve, and James saw something ahead that made his blood run cold. A rest area. A standard-looking highway rest area with a building, parking spaces, picnic tables, and a sign that read, Mile Marker 500, Final Rest Area, No Services. James didn't want to stop, but his truck was losing power. The engine was running, but acceleration was fading, as if some force was draining energy from the vehicle. He coasted into the rest area, unable to maintain speed, and came to a stop in one of the parking spaces. The engine died completely. James sat in his cab, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm his panic. The rest area was deserted, no other vehicles, no people, no signs of life. The building was a standard concrete structure like thousands of other rest areas, but the windows were dark and the door hung open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. He reached for his phone, knowing it wouldn't work, but needing to try. The screen illuminated, and to his shock, it showed one bar of signal. He dialed 911 and the call connected. A voice answered, "Emergency services, what is your emergency?" "I'm lost," James said, his voice cracking. "I was driving on I-70 and something happened with the mile markers, and now I'm somewhere else. Somewhere that doesn't make sense." "Sir, I need you to remain calm and provide your location," the operator said, professional and calm. "I don't know my location. I'm at a rest area at mile marker 500 on I-70, but that's impossible because I-70 doesn't have a mile marker 500 and the landscape is all wrong and—" The operator interrupted gently. "Sir, are you intoxicated or under the influence of any substances?" "No, I'm completely sober. Please, you have to believe me. Something is wrong with the highway. The mile markers are counting backward, and I ended up in a place that doesn't exist." A pause. Then the operator said, "Sir, I'm going to transfer you to someone who can help you." The call connected to a different voice, male, older, with a tone of weary familiarity. "Mr. Thornton, my name is Robert Chen. I'm with the Highway Reality Stabilization Program. I understand you've experienced a mile marker inversion event on I-70, is that correct?" James was so surprised to hear his name and to have his situation acknowledged that he couldn't speak for several seconds. "Yes," he finally said. "How did you know?" "We track these events," Chen replied. "They occur rarely, maybe once or twice per year on highways across the country. Mile markers sometimes create what we call inversion zones, where the numbering sequence reverses and drivers experience spatial compression. If they continue driving into the compressed zone, they can end up in adjacent spaces, locations that exist parallel to normal geography but aren't accessible through conventional travel." "Where am I?" James asked desperately. "You're in an interstitial space between marker points," Chen explained. "Think of it as a mathematical gap in the highway system. The mile markers are supposed to be abstract reference points, but occasionally they become concrete, real. When that happens, they create pockets of space between the numbered points, and drivers can fall into those pockets. You've reached marker 500, which is a stable point. You can't go forward from there. There is no marker 501 in your space, but you can go backward. Backward? James echoed. Start your truck, Chen instructed. Turn around in the rest area. Drive back the way you came. The markers will count down. 500, 499, 498. When you reach marker 0, you'll transition back into normal space. The inversion will reverse and you'll find yourself on regular I-70, probably near where you entered the inversion zone. What if I can't start my truck? James asked. Try, Chen said simply. James turned the key. The engine turned over twice, then caught, roaring to life. Relief flooded through him. He put the truck in gear, turned around in the rest area parking lot, and headed back to the highway entrance. The mile marker at the rest area exit confirmed 500. He drove eastbound now, watching the markers count down 499, 498, 497. The alien landscape around him persisted, the impossible formations, the purple sky, the moving lights. But the markers were decreasing, bringing him closer to 0, closer to escape. The countdown continued for what felt like hours, but might have been minutes or seconds. Time felt unstable in this place. 450, 400, 350, 300. The landscape gradually became less alien, the colors normalizing, the formations becoming recognizably geological again. At marker 200, James started to see other vehicles. Ghost images, translucent cars and trucks driving both directions, but not quite solid. He passed through them without collision, as if they were projections or he was the projection. Marker 100. The sky was normal blue again, the mountains looked right, and the ghost vehicles were becoming more solid, more real. Marker 50. Everything looked completely normal now, regular Colorado landscape, real vehicles, ordinary daylight. Marker 25. James passed a westbound truck and the driver waved, a normal interaction between drivers. Marker 10. Marker 5. Marker 0 appeared, a plain white marker post on the side of the highway, no number, just a 0 painted in black. James drove past it and felt a sensation like passing through a membrane, a momentary resistance and then release. His GPS blinked and restored itself, showing his position on I-70 westbound near Glenwood Canyon, exactly where he'd been when the mile markers had started counting backward. His phone showed full signal. The time displayed on his dashboard showed 6:18 p.m. Only 3 minutes had passed since he'd first noticed the mile marker discrepancy. James pulled over at the next legitimate rest area, parked, and called the number that had appeared in his phone's recent calls, the number for Robert Chen and the Highway Reality Stabilization Program. The number was disconnected, no longer in service. He searched online for any reference to the program. Nothing. No government agency, no official records, no mentions in news articles or conspiracy forums. It didn't exist, at least not in any publicly accessible way. James completed his delivery to Salt Lake City, but he couldn't shake the experience. He'd been to a place that shouldn't exist, had driven through impossible space, had reached mile marker 500 on a highway that officially ends in Utah at marker 228. He'd spoken to someone who knew his name and situation, someone representing a program that didn't officially exist. Over the following months, James researched mile marker anomalies obsessively. He found scattered reports from other drivers who'd experienced similar events, mile markers counting in wrong directions, spatial compression, transitions into alien landscapes. The reports were always dismissed as hallucinations, exhaustion-induced delusions, or hoaxes. But James knew his experience was real. He'd driven into an inversion zone, reached the mathematical endpoint at marker 500, and reversed course back to normal reality. He'd seen spaces between the numbered points, locations that existed in the gaps of the highway system's abstract reference grid. The question that haunted him was, how many of these interstitial spaces exist? Every highway has mile markers, thousands of numbered points stretching across the country. If the space between markers can become real, if drivers can fall into those gaps, then there might be thousands of pocket dimensions accessible from American highways. Places where the abstract becomes concrete and reality operates on different principles. James continued driving but developed new habits. He watched mile markers obsessively, tracking their sequence, noting any irregularities. When markers appeared in odd sequences or at irregular intervals, he immediately pulled over and waited, refusing to drive further until the sequence normalized. He told other drivers to do the same, warning them about inversion zones and the danger of following reversed mile markers. Most drivers ignored his warnings, thinking he was paranoid or disturbed. But a few listened, and a few of those reported back that they'd noticed mile marker anomalies and had pulled over as James recommended, potentially avoiding whatever fate awaited drivers who continued into fully developed inversion zones. James never experienced another inversion event himself, but he remains vigilant, watching for that moment when a mile marker shows a number that doesn't match the sequence, the first indication that the highway is transitioning from abstract reference system to concrete reality. And he keeps the memory of marker 500, that final rest area in impossible space, as a reminder that the highways are more than just pavement and paint, that they contain gaps and anomalies and places where the rules break down and travelers can slip through into spaces that exist between the numbered points. Spaces that count backward toward zero or forward toward infinity. Spaces where the concept of location becomes fluid and the question, where am I, has no answer that makes sense in normal geographical terms. The mile markers are watching, James knows. They're counting, and occasionally they count backward, opening doors to places that should remain closed, inviting drivers to explore the spaces between the numbers. The gaps in the grid, the impossible distances that exist between one marker post and the next. Story 5. The Rest Area Outside Time. Patricia Reeves had been driving for Northern Star Freight for 22 years. And in that time, she'd developed a precise internal clock that told her when to rest, when to eat, and when to push through fatigue. On May 27, 2020, she was hauling textiles from Charlotte, North Carolina to Atlanta, Georgia, following Interstate 85 south through increasingly warm weather. She'd departed Charlotte at 4 p.m., expecting to arrive in Atlanta around 9:30 p.m. The drive was routine until approximately 7:45 p.m., when Patricia began to feel an unexpected wave of exhaustion. It came on suddenly. One moment she was alert and comfortable. The next, she could barely keep her eyes open. She'd slept well the previous night, hadn't been driving long enough to accumulate significant fatigue, but her body was insisting it needed to rest immediately. She saw a rest area sign. Rest area 2 miles, parking available. Patricia didn't remember a rest area at this location from previous trips, but fatigue was affecting her judgment and memory. She took the exit, following a short access road to a rest area that looked standard. A parking lot with designated truck spaces, a main building with restrooms and vending machines, picnic tables scattered around a grassy area, and overhead lighting just beginning to turn on as dusk settled. Patricia parked her International LT in one of the truck spaces, set the parking brake, and climbed into her sleeper berth. She intended to nap for 30 minutes, just enough to shake off the sudden exhaustion. She set her phone alarm, lay down on the comfortable mattress, and fell asleep within seconds. The alarm woke her exactly 30 minutes later. Patricia felt refreshed, the exhaustion completely gone. She sat up, checked the time on her phone, 8:15 p.m. exactly right, and prepared to continue her journey. But when she looked out her window at the rest area, something was wrong. The other vehicles were in different positions. When she'd arrived, there had been 3 other trucks parked nearby and several cars near the building. Now there were 5 trucks, none of them the same ones she'd seen before, and the cars were completely different models. Patricia assumed the original vehicles had left and been replaced by new arrivals during her nap. But that seemed like an unusual amount of turnover for just 30 minutes. She climbed down from her cab and walked toward the building, planning to use the restroom before continuing. As she walked, she noticed other oddities. The sun's position was wrong. When she'd arrived, it had been setting in the west, casting long shadows eastward. Now it was positioned differently, higher in the sky, as if hours had passed rather than minutes. But her phone clearly showed 8:15 p.m., and the clock on her truck's dashboard had matched. Inside the restroom, Patricia splashed water on her face and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked rested, exactly as she should after a brief nap. Nothing appeared wrong with her reflection. But when she walked back outside, the rest area had changed again. Different vehicles, different positions, and now the sun was setting again, but from a slightly different angle than before. Patricia approached another driver who was walking to his truck. "Excuse me, what time do you have?" The man checked his watch. "8:15, why?" "That matches my phone," Patricia said, relieved. "I'm just feeling a bit disoriented. How long have you been parked here?" "Just pulled in 5 minutes ago," the man said. "Needed to stretch my legs, long haul from Florida." Patricia thanked him and returned to her truck, confused but deciding to continue driving. She started her engine, released the parking brake, and drove toward the rest area exit. But as she approached the exit road, something made her glance in her mirror. The rest area behind her was empty, completely empty. No trucks, no cars, no people, just empty parking spaces and a dark building. She stopped, put her truck in park, and stared at her mirror. The rest area was definitely empty now, though she'd just walked past multiple vehicles and spoken to another driver seconds ago. Patricia put her truck in reverse and backed up, returning to the parking area. The moment she crossed back into the rest area proper, the vehicles reappeared. The same 5 trucks, the same cars, everything exactly as it had been. Patricia pulled back into her original parking space, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. She grabbed her CB radio. "Anyone at the rest area on I-85 South near the North Carolina-South Carolina border, do you copy?" A voice responded immediately. "This is Carolina bound at that rest area, I copy." "Can you see my truck?" Patricia asked. "International LT, blue cab, parked in the 3rd space." A pause. "I see an International LT in the 3rd space, but I can't tell the color. Where are you?" "I'm sitting in the truck," Patricia said. "I'm looking at you right now. White Peterbilt about 6 spaces from me?" "That's me," the voice confirmed. "You okay? You sound stressed." "I'm trying to understand something," Patricia said carefully. "When I try to leave the rest area, everything disappears." "Have you tried to leave yet?" A longer pause. "No, I just got here, but now that you mention it..." "I tried to leave about an hour ago. Got to the exit, changed my mind about something, came back. I don't remember what made me change my mind, and I've been sitting here for an hour, but it doesn't feel like an hour, it feels like 5 minutes. Patricia felt her skin crawl. "I think we're stuck here. I think time isn't working right in this rest area." The CB crackled with multiple voices now, other drivers joining the conversation. A woman's voice. "I've been here for 15 minutes according to my clock, but my logbook says 3 hours. A man's voice. "I arrived at sunset, took a nap, woke up at sunset again." Another voice. "I've tried to leave 4 times. Every time I reach the exit, I forget why I'm leaving and come back." Patricia got out of her truck and walked to the building where other drivers were beginning to gather, drawn by the CB conversation. 7 drivers total, all experiencing the same temporal anomalies, all unable to leave the rest area successfully. One driver, an older man named Harold, had a theory. This is a time loop. We're stuck in maybe an hour of real time, repeating over and over. Every time we try to leave, the loop resets and we forget we've already tried. But something about acknowledging it, talking about it on the CB is helping us remember. How do we break a time loop? Patricia asked. I don't know, Harold admitted. In movies, you have to change something, do something different from what you did originally. But we don't know what we did originally that trapped us here. Patricia looked at the rest area building more carefully. There was something odd about it. The design was slightly outdated, the architecture typical of rest areas from the 1980s or early 1990s rather than modern construction. She walked closer and found a cornerstone. Established 1992, renovated 2003, closed 2019. Closed 2019. Patricia was experiencing May 2020. This rest area was officially closed, had been closed for a year. But it was operational, maintained, lit, functioning. They were at a rest area that shouldn't exist anymore. She shared this discovery with the group. Harold nodded slowly. That explains it. We're in the echo of the rest area. The physical facility is closed, probably boarded up or demolished in real time. But we've somehow accessed a version of it that still exists in the past. We stopped at a rest area that was open when we entered but is closed in the present, and now we're caught between those two states. How do we get out? A younger driver named Marcus asked, his voice tight with fear. Patricia thought about the problem logically. If they were in a past version of the rest area and the loop kept resetting every time they tried to leave, then maybe the solution was to wait for the rest area to officially close. To stay until the time when the facility shut down for the final time in 2019 and then leave during that transition. She checked her phone for information about the rest area's closure. The cellular signal was weak but functional. She found a news article. I-85 rest area closes permanently. Facility near border to shut down June 1, 2019 at midnight. June 1, 2019 at midnight. That was the moment when the rest area transitioned from open to closed. If they could somehow sync with that moment, they might be able to escape the loop. We need to wait for midnight on June 1st, Patricia told the group. That's when this place closed. If we're experiencing echoes of its operation, then the final shutdown moment should be the weakest point in the loop, the time when we can transition back to the present. But it's May 27th now, Marcus protested. We'd have to wait 5 days. According to our devices, Patricia said, but we don't know what date it actually is in the loop. Time isn't working normally here. For all we know, we're already approaching June 1st, or we've passed it multiple times already. Harold suggested they all synchronize their watches and devices to the same time, then collectively try to wait for midnight, watching for any signs of change. They agreed, setting everything to 11:30 p.m., giving themselves 30 minutes to prepare. The group gathered in the rest area's main building, sitting together in the lobby area, watching clocks and windows for any indication of change. As midnight approached, or as their synchronized devices approached midnight, Patricia noticed subtle shifts in the facility. Lights flickered. The air felt thinner. Sounds became slightly muffled, as if they were experiencing everything through a membrane. At exactly midnight, a voice came over a PA system that none of them had noticed before. Attention visitors. This facility is now permanently closed. Please return to your vehicles and exit the rest area. All parking must be vacated within 15 minutes. This is the final announcement. The announcement repeated twice more. The drivers looked at each other, uncertain. Was this real or part of the loop? We go now, Patricia said firmly. Together. Everyone get to your trucks and head for the exit. Don't stop, don't look back, just drive until you reach the interstate. They ran to their vehicles, started their engines, and formed an impromptu convoy heading toward the exit. Patricia led in her International LT, the other 6 trucks following in a line. As they approached the exit road, Patricia expected the rest area to reset, to trap them again. But this time, they passed through. The exit road was solid beneath her tires, the interstate visible ahead, and when she checked her mirror, the rest area was different. The building was dark, boarded up, with faded, permanently closed signs on the doors. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown with weeds. The overhead lights were gone, leaving only darkness. The facility looked exactly as a rest area closed for over a year would look. Abandoned, decaying, no longer maintained. Patricia and the convoy merged onto Interstate 85 southbound. She checked her GPS, her phone, her dashboard clock. Everything showed current date and time, 11:47 p.m., May 27, 2020. Only about 4 hours had passed since she'd first pulled into the rest area, though the experience had felt much longer. She tried to call the other drivers on CB to confirm they'd all escaped successfully, but her radio only produced static. She could see their trucks in her mirrors, all following her south on the interstate, but she couldn't communicate with them. One by one, the trucks took different exits, heading to their various destinations until Patricia was alone again. She never spoke to those drivers again, never learned their full names or how to contact them. But she researched the rest area afterward, finding its history. The facility had operated from 1992 to 2019, serving millions of travelers during that time. It was closed due to budget cuts and aging infrastructure, with a new, larger rest area built 15 miles south to replace it. Patricia found reports of other drivers experiencing temporal anomalies at closed rest areas, facilities that appeared operational when approached but were officially shut down, time loops that trapped drivers for hours or days, echoes of past operations that persisted even after physical demolition. The reports were scattered and dismissed as urban legends, but Patricia knew they were real. She drives past the location of that rest area regularly on her Charlotte to Atlanta route. During daylight, she can see the remains: crumbling pavement, a few foundation pillars, overgrown landscaping. But at night, especially around 8 p.m., she sometimes sees lights in that location, sees shapes that might be buildings, sees what looks like an operational rest area where nothing should exist. Patricia never stops there again. She drives past, even when exhausted, even when desperately needing rest. Better to continue to the next facility, the one that's actually open in the present, than to risk entering a rest area that exists outside normal time. Because the highways remember their services, Patricia has learned. Rest areas that close don't fully disappear. They leave echoes, temporal shadows, moments of operation that persist and can trap unwary travelers. And drivers who stop at those echoes can become trapped themselves, caught in loops of past time, experiencing the same hour or day repeatedly until they figure out how to sync with the moment of closure and escape back to the present. The rest area that exists and doesn't exist remains there on Interstate 85, Patricia knows. Sometimes open, sometimes closed, flickering between states depending on the time and date and awareness of the driver approaching. And somewhere in that temporal shadow, there might still be drivers who haven't figured out the secret, who are caught in endless loops, repeating the same brief rest stop over and over, waiting for midnight on June 1st, 2019 to arrive so they can finally leave and continue their journeys into a present they've been missing for subjective eternities. Story 6. The radio frequency of the lost. Samuel Torres had been driving for Western Alliance Transport for 16 years, specializing in overnight routes through the southwestern United States. On September 12, 2018, he was hauling industrial machinery from Phoenix, Arizona to Albuquerque, New Mexico, following Interstate 40 eastward through the high desert. The drive was familiar, the route well-traveled, and Samuel expected no complications on the 10-hour journey through the night. Around 2:30 a.m., somewhere between Holbrook and Gallup in eastern Arizona, Samuel's CB radio began picking up a transmission on Channel 19, the main trucker channel where drivers communicated about road conditions, traffic, and general conversation. But this transmission was different from the usual chatter. It was a voice reading numbers in a monotone cadence. 73294, 81563244718. The voice was male, emotionless, reading 5-digit number sequences with brief pauses between each set. Samuel had heard number stations before, mysterious radio broadcasts that transmitted encoded messages, usually attributed to intelligence agencies communicating with operatives. But those operated on shortwave frequencies, not CB radio, and certainly not on the trucker-specific Channel 19. Samuel keyed his microphone. Unknown station broadcasting numbers on Channel 19. Please identify yourself or move to a different channel. You're interfering with trucker communications. The number sequence paused. Then the voice responded directly. Samuel Torres, driver for Western Alliance Transport International ProStar, Arizona commercial plate number. And the voice recited Samuel's license plate number. Do not interfere with the transmission. You are hearing what you are meant to hear. Samuel felt ice form in his chest. The voice knew his name, his employer, his truck details. Who is this? How do you know my information? We are the frequency of the lost, the voice replied. We broadcast the final coordinates of drivers who disappeared while on the road. The numbers you hear are latitude and longitude pairs, the last known positions of trucks and drivers who vanished without explanation. You are hearing us because you are approaching a convergence point. Do not deviate from your current route. Do not stop. Continue straight through until dawn. What happens if I stop? Samuel asked, his voice tight. You become part of the transmission, the voice said. Your coordinates will be added to the broadcast and other drivers will hear them years from now, wondering what happened to Samuel Torres and why his truck was found empty at a specific location with no evidence of where he went. The voice resumed reading numbers. 35.2397 minus 111.8462. Samuel's hands were shaking on the steering wheel. He grabbed his phone and activated the GPS coordinates function. He entered the numbers the voice had just read, 35.2397, 111.8462. The location appeared on his map, a point in northern Arizona just off Route 66 near Flagstaff. Samuel zoomed in on the location and found a news article linked to that coordinate. Truck driver missing since 2003. Vehicle found abandoned. No signs of driver. The article described a driver named Kevin Mitchell who disappeared in March 2003. His truck was found parked at a rest area off Route 66, engine running, personal belongings inside, no signs of struggle or foul play. Kevin Mitchell was never seen again, and the case remained unsolved. Samuel felt nausea rising. The numbers being broadcast weren't random. They were real locations where real drivers had vanished. And something was broadcasting those coordinates to current drivers, warning them, or perhaps marking them as next. The voice continued reading coordinates. 34.9671. minus 109.3285. Samuel checked those coordinates. Eastern Arizona near the New Mexico border, close to where he was currently driving. Another news article. Trucker vanishes from highway rest stop. 2011 disappearance remains mystery. Stop broadcasting this, Samuel shouted into his CB. This is disturbing and illegal. We cannot stop, the voice replied. We are the record, the archive, the memorial. Every driver who disappeared, every truck found empty, every unexplained vanishing, we preserved their final locations, and we warn current drivers when they approach convergence points, places where the highways become unstable, where the boundaries between here and elsewhere grow thin. You are driving through such a point now, Samuel Torres. The next 60 miles contain 17 convergence locations. If you stop at any of them, you risk convergence. Your consciousness, your physical form may slip through to wherever the lost drivers went. Do not stop. Where did they go? Samuel demanded. What happens at these convergence points? We do not know, the voice admitted. We only know they disappear completely. Some theories suggest parallel dimensions, temporal rifts, or predatory entities that exist in the liminal spaces of long-distance travel. But these are theories. The fact is simpler. Drivers enter certain locations and cease to exist in our reality. Their trucks remain, their belongings remain, but the drivers themselves are gone. We broadcast their coordinates as warning and memorial. Samuel realized the voice wasn't threatening him. It was trying to help him, trying to guide him safely through a stretch of highway that had claimed multiple drivers over the years. How many drivers have disappeared? He asked. In this 60-mile segment alone, 17 over the past 43 years. Nationwide, thousands. The highways are dangerous not just from accidents and fatigue, but from convergence phenomena that we cannot explain or prevent. We can only document and warn. The voice resumed its number sequence, and Samuel realized it was reading the coordinates in geographical order, marking each convergence point along his route. He pulled up a map and began plotting the locations as they were announced. They formed a pattern, roughly one every 3 to 4 miles, clustered around rest areas, scenic overlooks, and emergency pull-offs. Samuel made a decision. He would drive straight through without stopping, no matter how tired or uncomfortable he became. He had about 2 hours of driving through this danger zone, and then he'd be clear, past the convergence points into safer territory where the boundaries between realities were presumably more stable. The voice continued broadcasting for the next 90 minutes, reading coordinates in that same emotionless monotone. Samuel focused on driving, maintaining a steady speed, staying alert despite growing fatigue. He watched for any signs of the convergence phenomena the voice described: strange lights, distortions in the landscape, feelings of disorientation, but everything appeared normal. Just dark highway, occasional traffic, and the endless desert stretching to the horizon. Around 4:15 a.m., the number broadcast stopped. The voice returned. Samuel Torres, you have passed through the convergence zone successfully. The danger has diminished. You may stop safely at any location beyond mile marker 341. Your coordinates will not be added to our transmission. Drive safely. The CB radio went silent, returning to normal static and occasional trucker chatter on other channels. Samuel checked his location, just past mile marker 341, exactly as the voice had indicated. He continued driving until he reached a well-lit truck stop near Gallup, New Mexico, where he pulled over, parked, and sat shaking in his cab for 20 minutes before he felt steady enough to move. Samuel researched the disappearances obsessively over the following weeks. He found dozens of cases matching the pattern described by the voice. Truck drivers who vanished completely, leaving behind running trucks and no clues about their fate. The cases were scattered across decades in multiple states, but they shared common features. Drivers disappeared from remote locations during night drives, usually between midnight and dawn, always without witnesses. Law enforcement treated these cases as abductions, voluntary disappearances, or deaths with hidden bodies. But Samuel knew better. Something about the highways themselves was consuming drivers, pulling them through convergence points into unknown destinations. And the mysterious broadcast, the frequency of the lost, was an attempt by someone or something to warn current drivers and prevent additional disappearances. Samuel tried to record the transmission on subsequent trips through that corridor, hoping to capture evidence. But the broadcast never appeared again on his CB. He tried different times, different dates, different channels, nothing. The frequency of the lost was silent, at least for him. But he spoke to other drivers and found a few who'd heard similar transmissions. Number sequences on CB radio. Voices warning them about convergence points. Coordinates of disappeared drivers being read in monotone cadences. Each driver had experienced the phenomenon only once, during a single journey through a specific stretch of highway. None had been able to record it or prove it to others. Samuel developed a theory. The broadcast only appeared when needed, when a driver was approaching actual danger. It was targeted, specific, activated by proximity to convergence phenomena. Drivers who weren't at risk would never hear it, would drive through those same areas without experiencing anything unusual. But drivers who were vulnerable, for reasons Samuel couldn't identify, would hear the warning and have a chance to avoid the fate of the lost. Samuel Torres still drives but avoids stopping in remote areas during the night hours. He plans his routes to ensure rest breaks occur at large, well-populated truck stops during daylight hours. He watches for signs of convergence points, certain areas where his radio develops unusual static, where his GPS briefly loses signal, where the landscape seems slightly off. And when he notices these signs, he doesn't stop, doesn't even slow down, just drives straight through until the feeling of wrongness passes. He thinks about the lost drivers often, wondering where they went and whether they're still conscious somewhere, trapped in parallel spaces or temporal loops or dimensions that exist adjacent to our highways. He wonders who maintains the frequency broadcast, surviving drivers who learned the truth, relatives of the disappeared who dedicated themselves to warning others, or something non-human that observes these disappearances and attempts to minimize them through cryptic warnings. The highways have claimed thousands of drivers over the decades, Samuel knows. Most die in inexplicable ways, accidents, medical emergencies, crimes. But some simply vanish, leaving behind empty trucks and unanswered questions. Those are the ones whose coordinates are preserved in the frequency of the lost, broadcast as warning and memorial to drivers who follow the same routes, traveling the same dark highways where the boundaries grow thin and people can slip through convergence points into whatever lies beyond. Samuel listens to Channel 19 on his CB radio every night he drives, hoping and dreading in equal measure that he'll hear the voice again, reading coordinates in that emotionless monotone. Because hearing it would mean he's in danger, but also that he's being warned, that something is watching and trying to help. And in the dark hours before dawn, when he's driving through remote areas with no other vehicles visible, Samuel sometimes transmits his own message on Channel 19. His name, his location, his coordinates, creating his own record in case he ever becomes one of the lost, so that future drivers might hear his numbers and know what happened and where. Story 7. The Last Delivery. Graham O'Neill had been driving for 41 years, starting his career in 1979 when he was 22 years old. He'd driven millions of miles, crossed every state in the continental U.S. multiple times, and had planned to retire at the end of 2020. On December 18, 2020, Graham accepted what he intended to be his final delivery, a load of Christmas merchandise from a distribution center in Memphis, Tennessee, to a retail warehouse in Dallas, Texas. It was a symbolic choice, ending his career with a holiday delivery, a final journey before settling into retirement with his wife and grandchildren. Graham departed Memphis at 3:00 p.m. in his Peterbilt 579, the truck he'd owned for 8 years and maintained with meticulous care. The weather was cold but clear, and Interstate 40 stretched before him through Arkansas and into Texas, a route he'd driven hundreds of times. He planned to reach Dallas by 1 a.m., complete the delivery, and then drive his empty truck home to Tennessee, closing out 4 decades of life on the road. Around 8:30 p.m., as Graham crossed into Texas, his CB radio came alive with a transmission that froze him in his seat. Graham O'Neill, Peterbilt 579, westbound on I-40 approaching Texarkana. This is your final delivery notification. Proceed to the following coordinates instead of your scheduled destination. The voice recited GPS coordinates that Graham quickly entered into his navigation system. The location appeared on his map. A rural area in northeast Texas, nowhere near Dallas, no town or facility marked at that location. Just empty land according to the satellite imagery. "Who is this?" Graham demanded into his CB microphone. "How do you know my name and route?" "We are the Terminus service," the voice replied. "We handle final deliveries for drivers who have reached the end of their careers. Your 41 years of service have been recorded and evaluated. You have been selected for special final assignment. Proceed to the coordinates provided. Your cargo will be unloaded there and you will receive final payment and discharge papers." "I already have a delivery location," Graham said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm contracted to deliver to Dallas. I'm not going to some random coordinates in the middle of nowhere." "Your Dallas delivery is a cover," the voice said. "A standard route to maintain appearance. But drivers who complete 4 decades of service are eligible for the true final delivery. The cargo you carry is not Christmas merchandise. Check your trailer seal number. Compare it to your manifest." Graham pulled over at the next opportunity and walked back to his trailer. He checked the seal, a numbered plastic tag that secured the trailer doors and provided proof that the load hadn't been accessed during transport. The seal number was different from what appeared on his manifest. Someone had switched the trailer after he'd left Memphis, replacing his original load with something else. Graham's heart hammered in his chest. This was impossible. He'd been with the truck continuously, had stopped only for fuel and food, had never let the trailer out of his sight. But the seal number didn't lie. This wasn't the trailer he'd picked up. He climbed back into his cab and checked his paperwork more carefully. The manifest listed Christmas merchandise, but there was a second page he didn't remember seeing before, printed on different paper. "Special delivery, terminus service, classified cargo, final destination coordinates provided." "What am I actually hauling?" Graham asked over the CB, his voice shaking now. "You are hauling the collected regrets, lost opportunities, and unfinished business of drivers who never made it to retirement," the voice replied. 41 years on the road, Graham. 41 years of sacrifices, missed birthdays, lost time with family, relationships that failed, children who grew up without their father present. Every driver accumulates these losses, most carry them to the grave. But drivers selected for final delivery have the opportunity to unload them, to deliver them to the terminus where they can be processed, archived, and finally released. "That's insane," Graham said. "You can't haul regrets. They're not physical objects." "Everything has weight," the voice said. "Emotional burdens, psychological loads, spiritual debts. These have mass and substance if measured correctly. Your trailer is heavy not with merchandise, but with 41 years of accumulated cost, the price you paid for your career. The terminus accepts delivery of these costs and credits you with a clean accounting. You arrive at retirement with zero balance, no lingering debts, no regrets to carry into your final years. This is the gift of the final delivery." Graham sat in his idling truck trying to process this impossible explanation. Part of him insisted it was a hoax, a prank, a psychological breakdown. But part of him felt the truth of it. He did carry regrets, did feel the weight of missed moments with his wife and children. Did wonder what his life would have been like if he'd chosen a different career. And if there was a way to unload that weight, to end his career free of those burdens. "What happens if I refuse?" Graham asked. "You complete your Dallas delivery," the voice said. You retire as planned, but you carry the weight for the rest of your life. The regrets will compound during retirement. The awareness of lost time will intensify, and your final years will be shadowed by what you sacrificed and can never recover. Most retired drivers experience this, a lingering sadness, a sense of having traded essential parts of life for miles and money. The final delivery offers an alternative. Unload the weight, receive discharge papers, retire clean. Graham thought about his wife, Carol, how patient she'd been through 41 years of his absences. He thought about his daughter Emily's high school graduation that he'd missed because of a delivery deadline. He thought about his son Michael's wedding where he'd arrived 2 hours late, having driven through the night to make it. 41 years of moments like those accumulating into a substantial weight of regret and loss. "I'll make the delivery," Graham said quietly. "Guide me to the coordinates." The voice provided turn-by-turn directions leading Graham off Interstate 40 onto increasingly rural roads. He drove for 90 minutes through darkness, following instructions that took him away from towns and cities deeper into remote Texas countryside. Finally, around 11:12 p.m., the voice said, "You have arrived. Park your vehicle and wait." Graham found himself in an empty field. Nothing visible except grassland stretching to dark horizons. There were no buildings, no other vehicles, no indication of why he'd been directed here. But as he set his parking brake and turned off his engine, lights appeared. Not vehicle lights, but something else. A soft illumination that seemed to come from the ground itself, outlining a large rectangular area about 100 feet ahead of his truck. Figures emerged from the darkness, walking toward his trailer. Graham couldn't see them clearly. They were silhouettes, shapes without distinct features, moving with purposeful but unhurried strides. They approached his trailer, and though Graham heard no sounds of doors opening, he felt the trailer shift as weight was removed. The unloading took approximately 20 minutes. Graham sat in his cab, watching through his mirrors, seeing the shadowy figures moving in and out of the illuminated area, carrying things that looked like boxes but flickered and changed appearance. Sometimes appearing as physical objects, sometimes as abstract shapes made of light or shadow. When the unloading was complete, one of the figures approached Graham's cab. It tapped on his window, a solid physical sound. Graham rolled down the window and the figure handed him a folder. "Your discharge papers," a voice said, the same voice from the CB. 41 years of service completed with full honors, 0 balance remaining. You are free. Graham took the folder. Inside were documents that looked like official discharge papers, but from no company or government agency he recognized. They listed his years of service, his total miles driven, his safety record, and at the bottom, burden accounting, delivered and processed, balance 0, retirement status, clean discharge. "What did I just deliver?" Graham asked the figure. 41 years of everything you gave up to drive, the voice replied. The time, the relationships, the experiences, the opportunities. We've taken custody of those losses. They no longer belong to you. You can retire without carrying them. "Who are you?" Graham asked. "We are the collectors," the voice said. "The administrators of the terminus. We exist at the end of careers, processing the costs and balancing the accounts. Not every driver is offered final delivery. Only those who served with honor, who maintained safety records, who treated others with respect. You qualified, Graham O'Neill. Your service was valued. Now go home clean." The figure stepped back from the truck, dissolving into shadow. The lights in the field went out, leaving only darkness. Graham sat alone in his cab, holding the discharge papers, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Lightness. The weight he'd been carrying, the accumulation of regret and lost time, was gone. He felt younger, freer, as if decades of burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Graham started his truck and followed his GPS back to Interstate 40. His trailer was empty now, truly empty, containing neither Christmas merchandise nor impossible loads of regret. Just an empty box behind his cab, ready to be dropped at a yard somewhere and forgotten. He drove through the night, not to Dallas, but straight home to Tennessee, arriving at his house at 8 a.m. on December 19th. Carol met him at the door, and for the first time in years, Graham looked at her without the shadow of guilt for time stolen, without the calculation of how many days he'd been away versus how many he'd been present. He just saw his wife, whom he loved, and felt grateful for the years ahead they'd have together. Graham officially retired on December 31st, 2020. He sold his truck, terminated his leases and contracts, and settled into civilian life. But he never forgot the final delivery, never stopped wondering about the terminus service and what they did with the regrets and losses they collected from retiring drivers. He tried to find other drivers who'd experienced final deliveries, posting carefully worded questions on trucker forums and in retirement groups. A few responded privately, confirming similar experiences, directions to remote locations, mysterious unloadings, discharge papers from the terminus service, and the profound sense of lightness that followed. One retired driver, a woman named Angela, told Graham, "I think we're the lucky ones. Most drivers retire carrying everything, all the weight of what we gave up. It crushes us slowly. But we got to unload it, got to deliver it somewhere that could process it and release us. I don't know where those regrets and losses went, but I'm grateful I don't carry them anymore." Graham agreed. His retirement was peaceful, unburdened, filled with genuine enjoyment rather than shadowed by regret. He spent time with grandchildren, traveled with Carol, pursued hobbies he'd always wanted to try. The weight was gone, delivered to the terminus, processed and archived and removed from his accounting. But sometimes, late at night, Graham wonders about the terminus itself. What is it? A place? An organization? A metaphysical construct? And what happens to the delivered regrets? Are they stored in some vast warehouse, destroyed, redistributed? Or do they serve some purpose Graham can't imagine? Fuel for something, currency for transactions beyond human understanding, or simply necessary processing of the emotional costs inherent in certain types of human work. Graham O'Neill doesn't know the answers, but he knows that somewhere in rural Texas there's a field where shadowy figures accept deliveries from retiring truck drivers, taking custody of 40 or 50 years of accumulated loss, providing discharge papers that somehow make the weight disappear. And he knows that he made that final delivery, unloaded everything he'd been carrying, and retired clean, free to enjoy his remaining years without the burden of wondering what he'd sacrificed for his long career on America's highways. The terminus service is real, Graham knows. It exists for drivers who've served long enough, sacrificed enough, carried enough weight. And when those drivers are ready to retire, when they've completed their final journey, the terminus appears in some remote location, accepts the delivery of their burdens, and sends them home free. It's a mercy Graham didn't know existed until his final delivery, but now that he's experienced it, he can't imagine how drivers retire without it, how they carry all that weight into their final years, how they live with the accumulated cost of decades on the road. He wishes all drivers could access the terminus service, could make that final delivery and retire clean. But he knows it's selective, available only to those who meet criteria he doesn't fully understand. So Graham contents himself with his own clean discharge, his own zero balance, and the peace that comes from having delivered everything, including the things he thought he'd carry forever, and finally, after 41 years, arriving home free.